No pay, no spine, no normal lifespan. Welcome to life as a chimney sweep in the Industrial Revolution, where the only thing blacker than the soot was your lung tissue. In the 1780s, as Great Britain was coughing its way into industrialization, little George Xander stood trembling before Master Wickham, a man whose heart was as hard as the coal that heated English parlors. At just 6 years old, George had been sold by his desperately poor parents for a sum that wouldn't buy a decent pair of boots today. "Too scrawny," Master Wickham muttered, poking George's ribs with a grimy finger. "But that's good. Skinnier they are, the deeper they can climb." And that was the first lesson in why being a chimney sweep was a nightmare wrapped in soot, bundled with misery, and delivered via a 4-inch wide chimney. Size was your greatest asset and your eventual doom. You see, the perfect chimney sweep was a small, malnourished child who could shimmy up flues that were sometimes as narrow as 7 inches across. Adults? Useless. Healthy, well-fed children? Too plump. What Master Wickham wanted was a half-starved urchin whose shoulders were narrow enough to navigate the labyrinthine passages of a Georgian chimney system. "Now listen here," Master Wickham growled at George. "Your job is simple. Climb up, scrape the soot down, don't die. Fail at any of those, especially the last one, and there'll be hell to pay." George would soon discover that climb up was a violent understatement. Climbing implied choice and technique. What actually happened was more akin to being stuffed like a cork into a bottle. Master Wickham's method involved pushing George feet first into the chimney, then poking him with sticks or, on particularly stubborn days, lighting a small fire beneath him to encourage upward movement. Nothing motivates like a licked flame at your heels. Master Wickham would chortle to his fellow masters, who would all laugh as if child torture was the pinnacle of Georgian comedy. But chimney sweeping wasn't just dangerous because of the immediate risk of being wedged, suffocated, or burned. Oh no, industrial Britain had far more creative ways to destroy a child. There was the constant inhalation of carcinogenic soot, which led to a particular form of cancer so common among sweeps it was literally called chimney sweeps cancer or soot wart. This delightful condition primarily affected the scrotum, because if you're going to get cancer from your job, why not make it as humiliating as possible? "See young Adams over there?" Master Wickham once pointed to a teenager whose face was twisted in pain. "Got the sweeps cancer. Won't be climbing much longer, nor fathering children neither." This was delivered not with sympathy but as a casual observation, like commenting on the weather. In the economics of child labor, Adams was simply a depreciating asset. By the 1790s, George had survived 3 years, an eternity in sweep years. His growth was stunted from malnutrition, his lungs permanently damaged, and his knees and elbows were scraped raw from chimney climbing. His skin never looked clean, with soot embedded so deeply that even harsh lye soap couldn't remove it. He had become what Londoners called a climbing boy, or, more colorfully, a chimney devil. The everyday routine was a masterpiece of misery. George would wake before dawn, often having slept on a sack in Master Wickham's cellar among the soot bags. Breakfast, if provided at all, might be a crust of stale bread. Then it was off to the homes of London's wealthy, where he would strip down to ragged underwear, clothing caught on bricks, and begin his climbs. "Sweep! Sweep!" Master Wickham would call through the streets, while George and the other boys carried brushes and bags, their presence announced by hacking coughs that served as a grotesque secondary advertisement. On one particularly memorable morning, George was sent up the chimney at the Nottingham residence, an elegant townhouse whose mistress, Augusta Nottingham, was known for her fastidious nature. "I want that chimney spotless," she instructed Master Wickham while pinching her nose, as if the mere presence of sweeps contaminated her carefully perfumed air. "Last time, soot fell on my new settee." What Augusta didn't understand, or perhaps didn't care to understand, was that keeping soot contained while cleaning a chimney was like trying to keep water dry. The very act of scraping created cascades of black dust that found its way into every crevice, including the sweep's lungs, eyes, and the cuts on his skin. As George was stuffed upward, his small brush extending ahead of him, he encountered the usual hazards: tight corners, jagged bricks, nesting birds, and the occasional colony of bats. But today brought a special surprise: a chimney that suddenly narrowed to a space barely wider than his head. "Move up, you lazy worm," Master Wickham shouted from below. "Can't, sir," George called back, his voice echoing in the sooty darkness. "It's too narrow." The response was immediate. A lit bundle of straw pushed up beneath him, sending flames and smoke upward. The motivation worked as intended. George, in panic, somehow compressed his small frame even further and squirmed through the passage, scraping off layers of skin in the process. Upon emerging at the top, covered in soot and blood, George had a moment of dark humor that only those in truly hellish circumstances can appreciate. Here he was, bleeding and gasping on a rooftop, with a view of London that the wealthy would pay to enjoy from their garden terraces, while he got it for the mere price of shortened life expectancy. The sweeps were known to develop sweeps asthma from the constant inhalation of particulates. This condition, now recognized as pneumoconiosis, progressively scarred the lungs until breathing became a constant battle. Many boys developed permanently deformed spines and limbs from being forced into unnatural positions during their climbs. One of the cruelest ironies was that Parliament actually passed laws to protect sweeps as early as 1788. The Chimney Sweepers Act required apprentices to be at least 8 years old and willing, with master sweeps required to provide proper clothing, decent living conditions, and opportunities to wash. A great law on paper that in practice was about as effective as a chocolate fireguard. With no enforcement mechanism, master sweeps like Wickham simply ignored it. Laws. Master Wickham would laugh when the subject came up. Laws are for those who can't afford to break them, and those who can afford to enforce them don't want to pay extra for mechanical brushes. Indeed, mechanical cleaning methods existed but were more expensive than sending a half-starved child up a chimney. Why invest in technology when human suffering comes so cheap? By 1800, at the ripe old age of 10, George was considered a veteran sweep. He had outlived 3 of his fellow apprentices. One who suffocated when trapped in a bend, another who fell from a rooftop, and a third who simply stopped breathing one night, his lungs finally surrendering to years of abuse. The social status of sweeps existed somewhere below rats but above the plague. They were necessary but despised. People would cross the street to avoid them, believing their blackened appearance was a sign of moral corruption rather than brutal labor conditions. The same households that required their services would refuse to let them use the servant entrance. On Christmas Day 1802, George experienced the height of this hypocrisy. After cleaning the chimney at a grand house during a holiday party, because heaven forbid the guests see evidence of how heat is provided, he was given a penny and a stale mince pie by the kitchen staff, an annual tradition of charity that allowed the wealthy to feel benevolent. As he sat on the back steps eating his pie, the homeowner's son emerged, a boy about George's age but with the robust health that came from adequate food and the absence of carcinogenic soot in one's daily diet. "Father says you're lucky," the boy announced with the confidence of the privileged. "He says climbing chimneys is an adventure and that I should be grateful I don't have to do it." George looked at the boy, considered explaining how his knees were permanently scarred from being pushed up flues, how he coughed blood most mornings, how he would likely die before reaching 20, but instead just nodded. "Yes, young sir, very lucky indeed." He coughed, a deep rattle that brought up black phlegm, which he discreetly wiped away. Nothing more exciting than being stuck in the dark, unable to breathe, with fire beneath you. The wealthy boy's eyes widened with something like envy, completely missing the sarcasm. "I knew it. Father never lets me have real adventures." And there lay the absurd disconnect, the comfortable classes viewing the deadly labor of the poor as romantic, while simultaneously ensuring their own children would never experience such adventures. George survived to the remarkable age of 14, when his services as a climber became less valuable as his body, despite malnutrition, finally grew too large for the narrowest chimneys. Master Wickham, in a rare display of business sense rather than compassion, transitioned George to an assistant role, teaching new apprentices, victims, the trade. The final cruel joke of the chimney sweep's life was that if you somehow survived childhood, outlasting the falls, the cancers, the lung diseases, the burns, and the general abuse, your reward was to become a master sweep yourself, continuing the cycle of exploitation. The victims, in order to earn a living, became victimizers. By 1875, when Parliament finally passed effective legislation banning child chimney sweeps, thousands of children had already been sacrificed to the god of warm drawing rooms and clean-burning fires. So the next time you enjoy a cozy fireplace, spare a thought for little George Xander and his fellow sweeps, whose short, painful lives made Victorian comfort possible. Because in the great industrial machinery of progress, the smallest cogs bore the heaviest burden, proving that in the race to modernize, humanity often gets lost in the smoke. After all, what better embodies the Industrial Revolution than using children as living chimney brushes? It was efficient, cost-effective, and only required sacrificing everything that makes childhood worth experiencing. The ultimate achievement of industrialization, turning humans into tools that could break, be discarded, and replaced without disrupting the tea service.